Thank you. That was wonderful. Thanks, David. That was a lovely introduction, and I hope I can live up to it. Is my microphone working?
You're good.
Okay, good. I know that some of you have read these poems, and so I was going to ask if there's a particular poem that you want to hear. I'd like to know now, so I make. Has anybody got a poem that they really wanted to hear tonight? Yes.
Her Rats.
Her Rats. Okay. All right. I was going to read one of those poems about my mom. I'll read that one. Anybody else? Yes.
Yes, that's still on the cover of Scates Ars.
Okay. Okay. All right. Yes.
Friday Night Fight.
Okay. Anybody else? All right. I was going to read two of those, but I wasn't going to read the Sexton poem. So I'm going to find it right now so that I know where it is, because I don't like it when people shuffle. Hence, I shuffled. And I went right to it. Cool. Okay, I'm going to start with a poem called Friday Night Lights. Fights. You know, I have Friday Night Lights is actually a TV program that I like a lot. And I have called this poem Friday Night Lights several times now, and I'm trying to move away from that. I don't think there's much that needs explanation here, except I'm not sure if Friday Night Fights are still on, but my father used to watch them every Friday when I was a kid in the 50s. Friday Night Fights. We're playing Scrabble. Someone's singing a little tune. You look sharp, and you feel sharp too. And Joe says, "You know where that comes from, don't you?" Bill and Annie don't, but I do. It's the Gillette Blue Blades theme song for the Friday Night Fights. My father sitting by the phone, Carmen Basilio's battered face still on screen, one eye half shut, nose flattened. My father, dead 7 years today, dialing the phone in the corner beside the ivy wallpaper, sobbing to no one in particular. Goddamn son of a bitch, I want to tell him what a good fight it was. And I'm hunched over, doing my father imitation. Everyone laughing because I'm good at it, though maybe feeling guilty because no one knows it's the anniversary of his death. But I can't stop. I'm going deeper. He whipped his ass, such a great fucking fight. It's dark in here. Figures clamor and snap in the marshy light. What is it my father wants to talk to? His swollen fingers dialing a number that never connects. Who is it I'm talking to when I'm talking him? Clown of a drunk who won't remember what he wanted or why he wept. I've crossed the river and back again. No, I'm talking to the part of me I thought was dead. This is a poem called Magritte, and it's after a painting by Magritte where there are big, massive trees, and the sky above the trees is light, but below the trees, it's dark, so it's like two different worlds. Magritte. Above it's dusk, sky still pale blue with clouds, but the trees eat light. Below their massive darkness, a street light already lit. The trees alive in two places. We live below. Here's the pig in the muddy barnyard with geese and dogs, or the pig rooting for food in a field of stinging nettle and bed straw, bathtubs and flung tires. Here's how a man lifts a split pig, headless, fore and hind legs still hooved from a refrigerated truck. He wears a red shirt, flips the hood over his hair, pushing up to lift it from the hook. Now his ungloved hands are on the wheel, cigarette glowing between index and middle finger, window expertly cracked for the flick of his ash. He drives past golden dates hanging from palms, black figs and rosy pears, a whole orchard cut back, newspaper bundling each wounded stump. Out of time or place, Marguerite's streetlight cast its circle on the deserted street. Everyone has gone home, and what rises is the first world, childhood, where I am expert at nothing, lone passenger already hurtling along the tracks, looking out this window at grapes, groves of singed apricot alive through drought and ready for harvest. In Los Angeles, the iceman hooks ice out in the alley, heaves a blue chunk onto my grandparents' back porch. This is the brightest light. Only a few steps past the red agave into the shadows, the darkness, a fire burning, and the old stove deep inside the house. I realized when I was going to read this poem today how odd it must seem to folks that, if you think about it, people in LA had wood stoves once. My grandparents had this old house that was built in the 1880s and had a wood stove in it. And I've lived in Oregon for a long time, 35, 40 years, and we've always had a wood stove. But LA, I thought that was very strange. I just hadn't registered the strangeness until recently. This is a poem, a rather long poem about sort of that late night feeling of just disassociating from who we are and moving around through different periods of time in one's life. Sometimes late at night, around 11:05, when I'm watching the local news, reporting traffic accidents and meth lab bust, and the reasons for the smoke that has sealed the city in a breath-ending autumnal haze in midsummer, I cannot lift myself. I'm not there. Then it could be any year, but probably the early 60s, 63 or 64, a Friday night. I'm watching Johnny Carson or Steve Allen or maybe Jack Parr and Judy Garland, who is swinging her legs from a stool, half singing, half crying. The jets are screaming overhead, and in the intervals after they pass, the neighbors are arguing again. And it doesn't matter which house, because they all do. Big John and his nameless wife, Julia and Ted, the Smiths, Rosie and Bob, or Lynn and Jack, the ex-Hells Angels who have settled down with their 4 kids. They all pretend they can't hear what the next is yelling, but I'm the one who hears nothing. My mother is sleeping, and my father has left for good, and all the years I was not there when my father was are gathered in the haze of aftermath, of disconnect, and I'm not there. I'm still not there, the way kids aren't when they can't do anything about what is happening. So instead, watch the bird dissolve into the corner of the ceiling as nothing continues to happen. Certain everything has happened before them, as I know everything has happened before me. And all of it, the war, the harm my parents visited upon each other evenings after work, and the long days of the weekend, has left me untouched. A miracle, living in a sheath of numbed, stunned light. I will wear years into the future, where I will overhear a woman in a drugstore telling the pharmacist how a drunken driver has killed her child. And though I am sorry and understands she hates all drunks, I know I am not the drunk who killed her child. I am not there, or even trying to be. But soon I will awaken, knowing I have been absent so long, I am in danger of never returning. Then I do begin to wonder where I have been, and all I can tell you now is that time has not yet begun. And though I can't explain how it did, maybe some clock slowly began to wheel when I did remember how one night I let the steering wheel slide out of my hands, the car beginning its slow drift toward the slough, just for the sake of seeing how it felt. Maybe for the sake of ending the not there-ness. But mostly, I don't feel that way anymore. Just those few minutes late at night when I am tired and for a moment outside. And then life resumes in a kind of flooding that I recognize as my lifetime, broken as anyone's, the pieces floating up, the one that knows I could have been that drunk, the weedy smell of the river in late afternoon, the crickets humming the day's small aches and pleasures in this, my present, which if I've learned anything, I've learned is never possible without the past. This is a poem called Fan, and it's about a number of things. There's a ballpark in it where I think it was was it the Phillies or the Cubs? Single A, the Phillies? Phillies single leg team used to play in Eugene. The ballpark, it was a WPA ballpark, great old ballpark. Mostly what you did is go there to sit and just look out at the city on a summer night. And other things in this poem are Mrs. Ramsay, which is Virginia Woolf's book, To the Lighthouse. It's about reading on a summer day and going to the ballpark at the end of it. Fan. Little engine of barbed wire and auto body, miscellaneous tunes drifting on the thinner, crystal dry ice when the wires way down snap in the snow and the refrigerator dies. Not today, a day born hot, men pouring tar on the grocery store roof before the worst of it arrives. You in a hammock, book in your hands, a chorus you've never seen singing one note over and over. You stationary as a fan on an office desk, blades turning round, round as the grove of oaks surrounding the farmhouse, the man in the window, sun finding his shirtless torso, fanning himself with the newspaper as vultures rise from the mown fields. By late afternoon, the shift at the mill over in Walker, two women will sit on a car's hood drinking beer. Boats on the river, the fisherman cast his line. The girl on the inner tube pushes away from the shallows. Evening, when lightning will flash once at the ball game. The birds nest hidden in greenery, calling good night to their secret lives. The whistle so public, announcing the trains coming and going. Each engine of song swelling, pushing the hours forward. But now, in the hammock, Mrs. Ramsay remembers a night 20 years before. Mrs. Ramsay knows her son will always remember the disappointment of this day. Such a long day, half a book's worth. And when it is over, everything moves quickly. And those who had lived are soon dead in the war, in childbirth, in the night, and none of them saw it coming, and not one action was determined by any other, though it was. Fan turning, blades flashing, little world, the lightning over the dark bowl of hills drawing a sigh from the crowd at the ball game, because it is in its moment beautiful and free of us, striking fire far away in the woods. This is Anne Sexton on the cover of APR, 1973. I think I was seriously starting to write in about 1969, 1970, and that was the generation of of young women who were encountering Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton. They scared the hell out of me. They had so much to say, and of course Sylvia Plath had died and a suicide, and I seriously questioned whether one could write poetry and have it be redemptive. I'm glad that David mentioned that. I do think poetry is redemptive. I think we take things in our lives and we make them into something else. So this poem is about, I was in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I got clear across the country, and I saw Anne Sexton on the cover of APR. It's summer, and I want to read something that will move me. I'm numb with waiting when I think of her. Hear the words, "Oh, starry, starry night," and see her face as I first saw it. The rueful eyes, slight smile, frame of dark hair on a newsstand in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I bought the issue, my first, and read the poems, those furies, those exiled voices she heard and meant to bring back into our hearing. Yet the words from her column, The Freak Show, were what I took away, because she was so sad, defeated by then, a year or two before her death, when she believed people came to her readings to see her cry. But when I think of the starry night, I'm not thinking of her tears. I know even as she looks at the painting, she's standing under the dark sky looking up, awed by the summer night. Whatever is broken, falling away. And recall how last summer I went looking for Mars, and when I couldn't find it in the moonlit meadow, stars flashing and falling, headed back to town, walked out onto the soccer field, and behind a cypress, Mars rested low in the sky. Red planet, a dying coal, already receding in that moment when she's talking not so much about a sorry death as a kind of dissolution, her desire to be sucked up by the great dragon into the vortex of night, doing no violence to anyone. And aren't there cypresses in the starry night? And haven't I been thinking of her for weeks, ever since I drove along the Oregon border listening to Macbeth? Then, near Cave Junction, where inside those caverns the guide tells you to be absolutely still before he turns out the lights and plunges you into a darkness so infinite you do fear you'll fall. Right about there, drowsy with heat, I heard the anguish of Macduff mourning all my pretty ones, surprised because I'd forgotten where those words came from. Then, when I first thought of that photo taken in 1973, years after she'd written The Starry Night, when the wonder of it all had gone, the grainy image of her terrible unhappiness looking up from the back seat, all the way back across the country, that long summer of Watergate, when nothing would save her. You see, I think poetry did save her, for as long as it did. This is a poem called Blue Boxcars, and there's a he in the poem who is W.S. Merwin. I heard him talking about Emily Dickinson at a conference in Vancouver several years ago. And he has the line, which is the second line of the poem, and he says, of Emily Dickinson, "We don't know where the grief comes from." And I just found that kind of remarkably liberating, because I thought, oh, I'm supposed to know where the grief comes from. And then I thought, well, I don't have to know where it comes from. And then I wrote this poem called Blue Boxcars. Talking about Dickinson, he said, "We don't know where the grief comes from. Surprising, because some part of me believed I could not claim it without its source, the way we say, I did not have or I have lost. Nothing random as a pickup straddling the freeway in the rain, its tarp flapping over a sodden couch, and cardboard boxes of household belongings, a string of blue boxcars against the bay, or night shift at the mill not yet over, the flashing lights of a train crossing where no one waits. Nothing I'd recognize the way I know the suddenness of khaki troops interrupting the Green Peninsula is reason for alarm, or the bottles and scattered trash under the overpass say someone has slept in a sleeping bag layered with newspapers before moving on. These griefs of citizenry we learn to claim or to ignore. But more like the swallow I dream, green feathers iridescent as an oil-slicked pool, its small heart throbbing, open beak gasping, and the sadness when I wake. The swallow, were nothing being equal, the young woman on the news who went out for cigarettes and ended up with a gun in her ribs, who reached into the flute of her own grieving heart and gave him what he needed to lay down his arms, find the white flag of surrender. Because she said no matter what he'd done, she wanted to give one mother back her son. So maybe it's what grief makes of us, the instruments of its sad music, the way the view out any window sometimes makes perfect sense, is greater than all its parts. Swifts on eaves, whole flocks resting on wires, cowbird and flycatcher, and just now that child lifted, still whole, glistening with sleep, the pure weight of him, head fitting into the hollow of his father's neck. This is a poem called Surrender, which ranges all over the state, but begins here in the Northeast, over on the Lostine in late September. This is the first time I've been out here, up here at this time of year. I usually come over in September. It's a lot different at this time of year. The driving is a little bit more harrowing at this time of year. Anyway, it's great to be here, and I love coming over when we come in September. And I think it ranges down to Grants Pass by the end of the poem. Surrender. It was the way the men had gathered around the stumps, how they had chained them, hooked and dragged them by tractor to the largest, which would not be uprooted. And then the burning, the slow blackening by the green Lostine late in September. Trucks circled and water sloshing in the rusted towers as fire traveled the gnarled pathways deep into earth, whirled golden and slipping away, that brought me to my aunt's bedside. I was ready by then. I knew the way to death. I'd seen the brick building where they'd left the 5-cent knee-high sign. I'd reached into the red cooler for cream soda in the liquor store where my father worked his second shift, and I knew another of the old ones was going. Or maybe it was the wooden roadside crosses, the plastic flowers, the unlit candles for Kimberly and later Jake, the way the deer and goats stood high on a cliffside overlooking the interstate like an ancient petroglyph that pointed to her passage. I was cooing by then, following the riff she sang. I hurt, hurt, hurt. 88, chest cracked and stitched, her valves replaced, part pig, part calf, her eyes closed as she called her sister out of the wind. Did she hear us calling her? I don't know. I was confused, telling her to go on when I might have meant go on over. But yesterday she laughed and told me she'd spent one of those long days at a bar in Long Beach, tossing back at least 3 shots of Johnny Walker. Then as she bickered with her sister, so familiar a cloud of pipe smoke from the old house enveloped me. And when her husband's last remaining brother entered the room, bowed and kissed first her hand, then mine, I thought they'd all been resurrected and didn't know why I'd been so ready to say goodbye. What was it I wanted to move on to? I thought of each white heron I'd seen standing in the reeds, and one in particular in the Applegate River. its patience as it waited for the flit of shadow, and how alone in mid-afternoon I listened to Callus, wondering if I could say why, since I know nothing about opera but the rain, the tears, and then I know if asked, I'd say it's because she sings me down the dark corridor where the roots are glowing. This book is dedicated in part to my mother in her 94th year. She will celebrate her 94th birthday in May. And when it's also dedicated to my husband. And when I took the book to her, she immediately looked at the dedication page. And I hadn't told her I was going to dedicate it to her. And then I quickly began to wonder, and so she was very pleased that it was dedicated to her, and then I wondered if she was going to be upset that it was dedicated to Bill as well, and she said, nope, not as long as I'm on top. My mom is a really, really tough person, survivor. I've learned a lot from her. This poem is about, it's pretty self-explanatory, but it's about cleaning out her apartment after she broke her hip in her 89th year, and never came back to her apartment because she moved into assisted living. Her rats. Under the red moon, haunches springing, tail upright, the wood rat does not swerve. Loving what glitters, the baubles it will take back to its nest, it walks quickly past my dog and me, on into the night, purposeful as his brothers, the beach rats, who waited in the eucalyptus leaves until my mother nodded over TV in the afternoon, and they slipped in through the hole in the screen, eating the bananas on the counter, leaving the shed skin she at first puzzled over, before they found their way into the closet for the night. Alone in her apartment those weeks she was in the hospital, I waited for them, afraid as she was not, even when she heard them scratching under the stairs. She assured me they were gone, told me the exterminator had brought her the big traps, and how when she heard them go off in the middle of the night, she waited until morning to see what she had caught, lifting the traps and each dangling rat with her rubber gloves on and carrying them out to the dumpster. She knew I could hardly bear to think of any of this. The breeze blowing gently, the rats stealing in through the hole, much less her slow walk to the dumpster. She'd say, I know it bothers you, but it doesn't bother me. It's just one more thing I have to do. And here, under the cusp of the red moon, happy for the wood rat and the nest it returns to, I understand I will always be the daughter, my mother perpetually satisfied with what she has assigned me, content that I have counted the loose quarters left on the shelf and lifted the boxes scattering the silver fish, confident that what she has left me to do was nothing compared to what she herself was left. This is called Threnody. I was up in a place called Caldera in the Cascades several years ago, around 2005, I guess. It was the spring after the huge burn up there the previous summer. And it was an interesting experience, not pertinent to this poem, but it was interesting to see what came back the following spring. But I think I make some reference to it, but maybe not. Threnody. The hermit warbler has broken its yellow neck against the pane of glass. The deer are wading in the creek at twilight. Farther off, voices over water, sweet smell of gasoline and the low hum of motors. Silver boats gliding away from cares and nickel-plated debt into the last blue gasp of Friday. The warbler still warm, a fullness receding in my hand. Feathers grown dull by the time I bury him. A rock above his grave, last sunlight through the trees, this little dirge, the sluice of creek water a salve. Loosestrife and lupin will bloom tomorrow, and a story comes now of money, its humiliation and lack, which takes me to my own story, so miserly. Why couldn't I be kinder? Why didn't those tears move me? Today I saw a barn door I'd owned complete with hinges, a bell whose sturdy clapper would ring hollow atonement. I saw the rusted iron welded by blue flame, and in that blue light my lack, my coldness, I'd fill with the creaking trestle, the streams bringing the meadow back, where I'd sit with the black cottonwoods. Even as the warbler's head fell side to side in my hand, even in the aftermath of knowing why I was not kind, I saw right through me, saw how I believe I owed nothing to one human who had hurt me. The boats are keel up on shore late in the evening, the warbler hours dead, and by their fires the hum of far-off voices whispers this abiding truth. This is a poem called The Future, in Muriel Draper's dining room, as seen through the lens of Walker Evans. 1930, and the whitened skull of a deer hangs above a vase of white peonies on the mantel, where two fedoras rest, one fitted on top of the other. Muriel Draper must be sleeping. Empty bottles and half-filled glasses left on the table from what surely was a party the night before. 1930, September, the day already hot in Los Angeles, and in a few hours my mother will break her ankle playing kickball on the first day of junior high. In the train yard, my father is waiting, about to hop an eastbound freight, the 8th grade and school over forever. Years later, after the war, in a housing tract near the airport, I will awaken to 3 deer standing in the closet, which I understand is the mouth of an orchard at twilight. I see them as if through an unwashed barn window stuck with chaff, dappled, leaves falling, a boy running ahead in the peaceful rows. And though I don't know yet to call it a future, I do know I will have a life other than the one I am living. Outside are roses and camphor trees, brown lawns and spent bicycles, the bird of paradise parading its orange beak, and my neighbor with the red sores on her arms. I've thought of her often, but something I've never thought about until early this morning is how later that day, babysitting, I chased her 4-year-old into the bedroom where her husband was trying to sleep. He was awake. I saw his eyes flicker, but he did not speak. His body swaddled in sheets like my father's or Christ, the only 2 mostly naked men I had seen. His other kids were screaming out back on their swing set, and I knew he had to get up in 2 hours, eat his dinner, work swing shift at Douglas, then graveyard at a gas station on La Brea. What I didn't know was that in the hours before dawn, when the heat is gone and the light sinks into a blueness slick as the oily sheen of the streets, a man will pull a gun on him and empty the till, and whatever future he might have been thinking about as he lay tangled in the sheets will disappear. I mean the future that allows me to look back at him, the future that gathers plans and expectations, making and remaking itself in the form of the possible, alive in the way the Greeks believed the hours were gods, or in the way Whitman stood in the bow of the ferry imagining us, insisting we'd be here to listen. And I do listen in those hours just before dawn when pieces of stories collapse into one story. And I remember that afternoon and this man whose name was Jack Archer, his face by now only a few lines poised in a cosmos intent on taking him back. Swallowing a man with 4 kids, 2 shifts, and a mortgage on a 2-bedroom house under the flight path. A man who, days after being robbed, will lose his job at the gas station, and because nothing seems possible anymore, forget to come home. I think I will read 2 more poems. This is a poem called Before, which tries to do that thing which is difficult, which is to imagine our lives if certain things hadn't happened. We lived on Douglas Street after the fire, said the ants, the fire giving what followed a form. The way you enter a neighbor's life, her face stricken as she walks along the road. She's ill or sad, and you're herding everything you know of her into the passing mirror of her face. Excuse me, I just lost my place. And you're herding everything you know of her into the passing mirror of that face to answer why. Tall irises by the fence, the wisteria that died, dogs pawing the window, a dream that led you to her open door. Now she's gone. Now early summer, penstemon, rosemary, nuka rose, each name a little mask of time departing. Now a dragonfly landing on a hammered star, blue jay squawking on the branch of the oak, send you back to the story you told yourself as a child, playing with blue feathers and grief, playing and if I had not lived, as we all do, and if the thigh unbruised, the knee unscarred, and if we could turn time back, erase that message chalked beneath the spray-painted graffiti of a southbound train. Mama, your God has forsaken me. And if that train rolled backwards to a train yard hundreds of miles north, cars uncoupling, where a young woman stands about to write, which forsaken moment would she choose? No wound, no plum falling glistening with heat, no bulldozed olive trees, no girl dying each death that brought her here, no boy, no bomb falling named little boy. And now you drive the road at twilight, incising time, a plowshare cutting the unbroken earth, each of us an open door, the threshold we step across, reading Milton when the phone rang, bad angel falling as you pick it up, before you cross, before things change, the moment we have left, the moment time begins, no plum falling glistening with heat, no bulldozed olive trees, older than remembering, no girl dying, any girl, any boy, father, mother, no bomb named little boy. Actually, I'm going to read 2 more poems. I think I have time. The first is about someone who appears in all my books, and she's the one who lived before that I loved because I thought she'd make me a better mother. You know, that thing that we do when we're kids. And it's called Again. You were beautiful, as always, though a little gaunt. Silk blouse sliding, hair still shoulder length in the style of that time. You were walking away, and might have kept on if I had not shouted. Blown fuchsias scattering just then, if it was then. Cabbage roses, bowing in the rain. I've been listening to Dupre play the Archduke with Zuckerman and Barenboim, all of them so young, listening to how they lingered, unafraid, in their fugue of sorrows, each answering the other, whirls of petals opening one by one, playing as if, yes, as if there were no tomorrow, as if they knew one among them would die an early death, though it is that death we bring to listening now, you turning toward me, my arms around you, sinking into the sweet scent of you, of roses growing so easily in every yard, and the good side of Scotch before the slide. I said how much I'd missed you, but over your shoulder saw how the graveyard angels stood in an otherwise bare field, granite angels dressing the dead as they were never dressed in life, and then you pulled away, asked where I'd been. Angry with my absence, you left me standing on the porch of your yellow house, screen door between us on those afternoons, when you were the sad ones, and I your heir, the neighbor child who wanted in. A lifetime since I've looked for you, so ample my love of lushness, of all that's fallen. And I'll end with a poem called The Giants, which is about my father, about my uncles. In other words, the men I grew up with. Out here, all darkness, stars overhead, I can finally see the giants. After all the years weighing dreams' fragments, I can see how each small thing, dead bees, a girl touching her ear, rose petals in a pool of molasses, leads to something larger than a life. The way the eye follows a trail of stars, then sees first one and then another constellation against the dome of night. My giants, I can almost love them now. Their hunger like a piece of oak in the fire, eating every piece of wood around it. They ate everything. They left the bones scattered on the old brown sofa, the rabbit headless in the yard. They lumbered, light full on their shoulders, their hair backlit and flaming, birds and small animals fleeing as whole families left uneaten meals behind. I know they can't eat me. I know them as I know that to a child I might be as large as they were. And when they fell, the distance of their falling was so great the blood flowed, the earth smoldered, and when they cried, their crying filled every room with their tears, and worst of all, when they left, they always came back. The jostling, the trestles quaking in those days of the giants, sowing their bitter gifts, their curses, their sour blessings, their hurled and their spilled and their shattered. What was it that ate them? The dream they couldn't see burning inside them, the questions they never asked, the tree under whose shadow they did not lie down? I can see them, all that broke them, their shirts creased with sweat and rank oil when they climbed into the truck's cab at dusk, clutching the brown bag and the lottery ticket. Their feet rang out, their doors slammed, they trudged, they cried. They gave me these stars on a dark road, the rose book on a winter afternoon, the hooked thorns of the climbers, the ramblers blooming over their graves and outbuildings, blooming over their graves. They gave me everything I wouldn't have known to love without their whine, their roar, their terrible noise. Blew that, but... Thank you. I'm happy to answer questions if you have them. I was told that there might be some questions. Yes?
You have a couple references to music. I mean, obviously you have a lot of like poets who inspire you. Is there one like composer or musician who inspires your work at all?
I don't know if it inspires my work, but I do listen to a lot of Beethoven. I love Beethoven. I love John Coltrane. So yeah, I'd love to think that they inspired it, but. And Maria Callas I like a lot too. Yes?
You mentioned a lot of times where you just sort of see this, you seem to be going about your day, going on a trip or whatever, and you see this thing like the face of a face on a magazine or a picture or a photograph or something, and you take that and you're sort of like, oh, this would make a good poem. Do you find yourself doing that a lot, or is that just something that I'm picking up that probably isn't the case?
No, well, I mean, I don't necessarily think that something will be a good poem. One thing I do is I keep track of images, things that strike me. I mean, if I drive over here and I see a cow standing in the field, I'll just write down a little notebook and say cow standing in the field. So the Sexton thing had haunted me for years, and since my process of writing is to sit down in the morning and really accept whatever comes, I'm pretty free associative, and I will if I don't feel something coming, I'll look at this book where I've noted images, and if something seems particularly resonant to me, I'll say, oh, Sexton, yeah, this is the morning, and it seems to ignite something. I'm somebody who does a lot of drafts too, so this free associative way that I work is pretty sloppy and pretty time consuming. I don't know what I'm going to do before I sit down, though. So.
In almost all of your poems, you mentioned something about the war. I was just wondering why it had such an effect on you. Is it because of where you grew up? The people that were
my father was a veteran of the Second World War, and he died in a veterans' home. He was really broken by it. So it had a tremendous impact on my immediate family because, and he's clearly somebody growing up. He was having flashbacks. He was also deeply alcoholic, and he just, he apparently was not the same person. I didn't know him. I was born after the war, but my brother knew him, because my brother was born before the war. So, it had a huge impact on us. And I really want to give my father a voice. Yeah. Concerned with that. Anybody else? Yes?
Your poems seem largely autobiographical. Can you talk a little bit about your first-person voice and how you see yourself in a poem?
My poems are autobiographical to a certain extent, but over the years, I think what's happened is, I know when I started to write, I felt that I was writing out of a very single eye. I have a lot more permission now to use that first-person eye to range farther than my own experience, I think. And that's just something that's evolved in my process of writing over time. I don't know if it may begin as an autobiographical reference, but it does not necessarily end there. So I'm not sure how that's happened, but it feels to me that if in my first book, if I read my first book, I know that I'm writing out of what I strictly think is my own experience, but I don't think I am now. Does that answer that? I think it happens as, it's out of the practice of writing, I think you just write deeper and deeper into a sort of common consciousness that belongs to us all, and maybe at the tip of that common consciousness is this little thing called I. But I also think that by writing, we're going to find out things that we had no idea that we know. That's what the process gives us. You in the front row here?
Give an example.
Give an example, thanks.
A poem that starts with an I and then goes someplace else, and where's the else that it goes?
Gee, dear. I don't know that I can do that immediately. I can't think of a poem where that. Do you know a poem where that happens?
I just want to hear what you have to say.
I can't think of one. I don't have to answer your questions. That's the other part. I'm happy to answer anybody else's questions, but I don't have to answer yours. Yes?
your poem about dissociation that we feel in the night, as you described it.
Yeah.
It seemed like that dissociation can almost be common for just observing as you're passing a street, kind of, where you're just making all these notes. And in your poem, you specifically describe this moment where your character is listening to this story about this woman whose son got killed in the car accident.
Right.
And the character sympathizes, but it's like at the same time, I didn't do it.
Right.
It seems kind of like a common state of mind to me. Why do you think it's particularly true in the night?
Because we give up the narrative late at night. We get tired, you know. I mean, I think part of what we do with our lives is a lot of the time is really to hang on to the story. You know, we got to hang on to the story. But sometimes when you get tired and the story dissolves, and then you see that, you know, that you don't need to be contained by the story, and it's okay to go outside it and look at it a little bit. But it was also, I think, common to a feeling I had as a kid where the situation was not great, and I needed ways of, you know, going up someplace else and looking down on things so that I could get out of where I was. And I should also say the other way I got out of where I was when I was a kid was my mom worked for the LA Public Library and brought books home, you know, and I read a lot, and that's. But so I think, but that's apart from that question. But does that help answer that? I think, you know, again, to go back to what writing is for me, it's about giving up the narrative that I'm used to a lot of time and finding something else new. And the interesting thing about that poem called "Not There" is that I type on a computer and then I print out after every version. This is a poem that I lost. It's called "Not There." I lost it 4 times. I never lose poems. Never lose poems. And each time I then had to write it from memory, which is a good exercise for the writers among you when you're having trouble with something. Just turn it over and see if you can do it from memory and see what rises to the surface. But it virtually came back intact each time, so I figured it was all supposed to be there. In the back?
Your description of events and places is pretty immaculate. Have you always used like additives? Have you always been adept at using additives in your writing? Do you find it easy, or is it something that you build over time?
I think it's something I learned to do. I mean, by immaculate, what do you mean? Just that it's
just so detailed. It's like photographic memory. I enjoy listening to your writings because I felt like I could see everything you
Huh. Well, that's interesting. In a lot of ways, remember when I was talking about how I write images down? And in this image book, I don't write sentences down. I just write the image. And an image is resonant to me when I can do something like what you're talking about. When I just start to write, that image is there. And the rest of it seems to unfold as if it were a photographic memory. It's a wonderful feeling to be able to do it when I can do it, because I can't always do it. But it also comes through draft after draft after draft of you know, very rarely, except for that "Not There" poem, do I get poems on a first draft. I work really hard through many drafts of a poem to get to a place where I'm satisfied with it. It's much more fun to do the first couple of drafts than it is the next 20, but that's what it's about, is probably about 20. Anybody else? Yes?
Back to Bill's question. What about the poem about the little girl reading, the novels, the horses, etc.?
Thank you, David. and that does... Oh, that's one. In the context of that is that's where I do what?
Start with an I thing and make it bigger.
Yeah. And how that happens?
Read the poem.
You want me to read the poem?
Sure.
Wild, fecund, bursting from winter. The carriage wheels turning and echoing a long afternoon with a Russian novel. the memory of the novel and the afternoon, becoming one as layer upon layer of afternoons settle over you in the story of a lifetime. The gut of something flitting, the hills amber, light diffuse, and you remember the fire, the burning trees of last August, and your uncle long ago pointing to the street light in front of your house. He tells you that each night he turns the lights on all over the city, and when he asks if you can tell time yet, you understand you will tell time. No evening by one man turning the lights on. Just as you know, if you stop following this thread of memory, all else will fall away. The way it did the afternoon you put your dog to sleep at the mouth of the woods. And though the vet had said she might startle, when the needle entered her vein, she did not, but slipped into it, went peacefully, and you were lost. So chert enters, so psalm, and the dream where your children are well-formed 8-year-olds, curiously slick, like newborn colts, with the afterbirth of yearning, as the horse lifts his head over the fence, the long bridge of his nose all a white blaze, blaze so loved by little girls reading stories of horses they imagine naming their horse Blaze, because they do not yet know this horse, is all horses, horse lifting its legs, pulling the chariot on the Parthenon frieze, amber horse on the cave walls of Lascaux, horse swimming, black legs churning green water, horse pulling the carriage in Russia. Not just one horse, as your Russia is not your Russia at all, but one fire kindling the next. The hillside behind the corral burned, and by the lake the trees charred to the shoreline. The lake, which seen from above might be a blue coin, alms dropped in a baker's basket of singed hills, the wind pushing its chopping waters through twilight, carriages rumbling along the still soggy roads in Russia, where you lie down next to the grief of old aunts and governesses who have no children, where the serfs bend in the fields planting summer wheat, and at the end of the day fall sleeping on dirty piles of straw, their huts clogged with the smell of afterbirth and cabbage and unwashed bodies, smells never recorded in the translations you love. And here one girl reads by the fire, the girl taught by the good governess who saw her carrying a book she knew she wanted to read. Well, one thing that happens in this poem is that there's no I. And a lot of the time when I want the I to fade, the you, by addressing a you, I can also address a you that is a reader and a you that is bigger than me. I'm talking about the boundaries blurring. Those boundaries get to blur. I've tried to write this poem in the first person and it closed down. By using the you, it allowed me, I think, to get to the horse, which, you know, where I really felt like I was lodged inside archetypal experience when I was able to say, you know, this isn't one horse, this is all horses. And it's really, that's what the poem is, you know, that the poem is, it's not my poem, I happen to write it, but it's our poem. You know, I'm the one who may have tapped into it. But if you listen to one of my poems and you hear it and you respond to it, it's your poem too. There's a sort of archetypal underwater river running underneath us, and that's what we get to tap into. I don't know if that answers your question. Does that answer your question? I like it. You like it? Thanks. David?
You're fine.
I'm fine.
Thanks a lot for coming.
Thank you for the terrific questions. You're a great audience. I'm really delighted to be here, and I really enjoyed being here. Thank you.